Hey everyone, today I wanted to review the horror movie The Lodge. It came out earlier this year. This is going to be an in-depth review, so at some point I will get to spoilers, so I'll let you know that when I get to that point. But it stars Riley Keough and Jaden Martell. Um, so this is more of a psychological horror than anything. So this movie really isn't for everyone. It is very reminiscent of movies like Hereditary, mainly that, a little bit like Midsummer, just in the feeling, not so much in especially the atmosphere. But if you liked those movies, then you probably would like this. That's my favorite of the three. I don't personally like Hereditary, and I think Midsummer is okay. And this movie itself has some good, some bad, but I'll get into that towards the end. But so what this is about is a small family that goes through something early on that is a big change in their life. These two kids in particular. So they're living with their dad, who has this girlfriend that they're not really approved of, and they don't really like her. But they have to get to know her because the father plans on marrying her, and so um, they go away to this lodge that's very isolated from everyone right before Christmas, and it's a few days before Christmas, and so the dad has the idea of these kids getting to know the soon-to-be stepmom, and so they don't really want to, but because she's going to be a big part of their life, he kind of forces it on them, and so early on in the movie, something happens that they start to believe that they've died, or something, has odd has happened, and it's very religious centric, as you can see by the Blu-ray cover here. There's a cross on her face, and you get to know more about her character early on in the movie. Riley Keough's character that is very symbolic of religion, or I guess I should say, her character has a big part to do with uh, religion in this movie. So from this point on, I'm going to talk about spoilers. It's pretty difficult to not when you're talking about this movie, and plus I wanted to do an in-depth review. So I wouldn't recommend this movie to anyone that isn't into psychological horror or isn't into those types of movies. So um, yeah, from this point on, it's going to be spoilers. So I'm going to talk about some of the good and some of the bad. I'm going to talk about good first. And so, one of the best parts of the movie, and I think it's probably the best part of the movie, is within the first like 5 minutes, and that is Laura's suicide. And that she's played very well by Alicia Silverstone in like the two scenes she's in. You see how she is putting on all this makeup, trying to maybe when she goes to see her soon-to-be ex-husband. Uh, maybe they can reconcile and get back together, and she's hopeful of that. But then when she gets there, she finds out that all he wants to do is get the divorce papers signed and move on. But you see in the small time that you get to know her that religion was important to her. She's wearing a cross. There's things on the wall that are religious items like a crucifix, or things like that, that you can tell that she's a religious person, and you get to know that a little bit as the movie goes on. And whenever you realize that she's committed suicide, when you see that scene, you realize that kind of the impact of that, what it drove her to, if she was so religious, how much stress she was under. And so um, it also is a really good scene right after the suicide. There's a funeral, and Mia and Aiden, her two children, are very upset, obviously, over this. And Aiden is trying to be very supportive towards Mia, but there's a scene where Mia is crying in bed after the funeral because she has these dolls, and there's black balloons that they're all letting off into the air, and she ties a doll of her mother that I guess the mom made or something, and she's hoping it goes up to heaven because, you know, she ties it and is hoping that the doll going up to heaven symbolizes her mom, even though his dead, is in heaven. But when it hits the ground, she starts to cry, thinking that because her mom took her own life, she's now gone to hell. And so That's a very powerful scene, and from pretty much that point on, you can see how the movie's color has gone from early on. It's not colorful, but it's brighter. The sun's out. You can see um, there's at least color in the movie, and then pretty much from that point on, the movie gets really dark and it's not very bright. The only color you see is basically white, just because of the snow. It's either that or it's like wood, just because they're in a cabin. So for the most part, this movie does have a really dark, cold, empty feeling to it, almost like a purgatory type setting, and that is intentional. You can tell with the way that this movie is going because of there being a scene a little bit later on where they have gotten to know Grace, who is played by Riley Keough, a little bit better, and they wake up and there's nothing left in the house. There's no, like, the pipes don't work or something. I think they're frozen. I think only certain water runs. There's no electricity. Her medication's gone, and there's no food. There's just canned goods, and so you can see how, like, throughout this movie, this that suicide really affected these kids, and the feeling they have towards Grace is very understandable. And you really do feel like if you were in that situation, you wouldn't like Grace either, just automatically, because this person is trying to take almost the spot of your mother when you don't even know her. And when you find out about, or when they do find out about Grace, how her childhood was basically, she was forced into a suicide cult by her father, who was I guess, he was the leader of this cult. He was like almost like their leader or their priest, and he was among everyone that killed themselves. She was the only one that didn't, and she was to basically continue on his teachings. And you see her walking around with a video camera showing people that have sin with written on their mouth. And so her job was to carry this on, but she got help and moved on. She didn't want anything to do with that. And you can see how she's very afraid, or I guess doesn't like to be around religious artifacts. She takes down all the crucifixes. There's a scene where she takes down a painting of Mary. And so you can see how that childhood affected her. And so she gets a dog. That's kind of like her coping with everything. The dog really keeps her sane along with the medication, and there comes a point where that dog ends up missing for a short time until it's found frozen to death out in the snow. And after everything that's happened for the past few days to her, where there's no food, there's no medication, she's starting to really believe that she is going crazy, or that she has died, along with the two kids, because there's a scene where Aiden shows that they can't die, and he pretends to hang himself. You find out that they're really just messing with Grace. And I'll get into more of that in the second half, the mixed or bad feelings I have towards this movie. But you see how she's got these nightmares, or these, just without being on the medication, you see her having these sleepwalking nightmares, and how she's slowly descending back into her like suicide cult type, ways whenever she was part of that. And when she starts to believe that she's dead, they start writing repent on the mirrors, or something. They start yelling to her, repent. And so she thinks that as hearing her father's old sermons come back to her, that they've died and they're in purgatory, and the only way out is to repent for their sins. She starts putting back up the artifacts that or the religious items that she was so uncomfortable around. And there's a really good scene where, after she finds her dog frozen out in the snow, she's just sitting there for like a day. And then when she finally comes inside, they come down the steps and they see her, and she's got a burning log, puts it in front of the picture of Mary, or it was either that or a cross, I can't remember, that's hanging above the fireplace. And she kneels on it, and even though you can see she's got frostbitten lips and her knees, like she burns all the skin off of her knees, she's praying to that and she's finally pretty much like lost it, and she does believe that um, she has to repent, and I think that that was a pretty good scene. There's a lot in this that I did like. Those were primarily the things. There's a lot that I could get into. I'm gonna do my best to try and not totally ruin it, but getting into the mixed and the bad. The final scene I feel like should have shown what it was going for. You know what's going to happen, but they don't show it. And I kind of would have liked them to have done that. Just before that, you do see what Grace does to the father, and you, I feel like if they show that and then they show early on Laura's suicide, they could have shown what it was going for at the end, and I feel like it would have been really, um, I guess, just would have ended the movie in a more powerful way than just kind of hinting at or subtly showing what's going to happen. Um, I guess I should just say it just because I feel like if you've gotten to this point in the movie or into the review, you've seen the movie or at least you don't care about spoilers. But yeah, so there is the ending where she's got the revolver sitting on the table. She's singing this religious song, and they're forced to pretty much sit at a table while the father's at the head of the table, but his brain's been blown out the back of his head because she shoots him, and he's just slumped over dead. And the two kids have got food in front of them, and they're pretty much just waiting for the song to end. She puts tape over their mouth with the word sin on them, and she plans on, I guess, killing all of them, and she plans on carrying on what her father started. And so I do think that that ending is better having seen it the second time, but I still would have liked to have been all the way. If you're going to show it, if you're going to have them die, I feel like it would have been just as or more powerful to have just shown her do that. And I know that they're kids, but it's a horror movie, so plenty of horror movies have shown child death, so I feel like it would have kind of completed this movie. It's not bad, it's just that was one of the mixed feelings I have. This one, like I said, it's not a horror per se. It's more psychological, and yes, it is. It's classified as horror, but there isn't much horror. It's more just you see throughout Grace's nightmares and her envisioning her killing these kids, or there's a scene where she drowns or she's being pulled under the water by her father, and just kind of nightmarish visions she has of that time in her life. So there isn't much horror, but it's more of a psychological movie, and some people might not like that. I thought it was the first time very boring, but by the end I was I didn't know how I felt, and so that's why I wanted to buy it, because this is kind of one of those movies that I felt you need to watch more than once, and I do like it a lot more having seen it twice now, but it still could have had a little bit more in it that made it more horror, not just psychological in a way. But yeah, it is understandable that these kids don't like Grace, but there's a point where it feels incredibly unrealistic to think that two kids would go this far to just maybe either try and get Grace to kill herself just like her mother or their mother, or just get her to leave. I feel like them hiding her medication, turning off the power, putting everything hiding in the basement, that in the house, just a completely empty house, and they're just supposed to just suffer themselves even without like food or water, or not much food or not much water, for days on end, just to prove a point or to have her kill herself. Like, you know, it backfires obviously, but I just feel like that is kind of unrealistic. But I guess it's clearly, you can tell that it's more Aiden's idea. He doesn't like her more than Mia. Mia early on, you can see, kind of tries to get to know Grace, but it quickly doesn't really happen because the dog takes the toy of her mother, and whenever she kind of at that point you can tell is really doesn't want to even try to get to know Grace. And so yeah, I don't know, I kind of felt like I didn't really like that part of it, like that whole reason behind everything happening. I don't know, it was okay, but I feel like maybe something a little bit better could have happened. I don't know what that would be, but yeah, that the way that they had this whole kickstart, or the reason behind the kids doing it is just incredibly unrealistic. But yeah, when Grady dies, the dog, you kind of stop feeling for the kids, and I feel like that might have been intentional. But you know, the whole movie you're like kind of on the kid's side, because you're like, I really don't think if you're in that situation, you would get to at all feel for Grace, other than maybe just for the dad's sake. But when you realize what they've done to the dog, they've let it out to freeze to death. You really don't care about the kids anymore. And at least me, I went from being like, you know, you feel for these kids that, you know what, whatever Grace does to them, it's kind of on them at this point. But yeah, like I kind of mentioned, this is kind of a movie that's hard to watch for a casual movie goer. It's very like psychological, slow moving, and it's very reminiscent of Hereditary and Midsummer. And like I said, I don't like Hereditary. I watched it, and maybe it was just because when I went into it, I didn't know what I was getting into the first time. But that is kind of the same feeling I got when I went into this. But oddly, I liked this. So I guess going into it, I kind of knew, okay, it's going to be like that. But it is very like that, especially in the way that there's a lot that it actually takes from Hereditary. There's a dollhouse that's very just like Hereditary. Just the color of the movie seems to be there's very dull colors. There's not a lot of bright colors. Hereditary, I'd say, is even brighter than this at times. So if you don't like that kind of thing, you know, then this wouldn't be the movie for you. But if you've gotten to this point in the video, you already know a lot about how this movie is. So, you know, I do like the movie. I would recommend it if you haven't seen it and you still are watching by this point. But if you have seen it, let me know what you think in the comment section. Personally, it's actually been one of my favorite movies of the year. I don't think enough people saw it, or at least gave it enough chance, because it is kind of a movie that you sit through it once and it kind of gives you mixed feelings. So I do think everyone in it, for the most part, did a really good job, especially Riley Keough. Definitely carries this movie for a lot of it. So yeah, just curious to hear your guys' thoughts on The Lodge. And thanks for watching. Talk to you soon. See ya.